Hello and welcome to the Times of India. You're watching Global Pulse with me, Neha Khanna. If you had any doubts about whether Donald Trump would carry out his threat of imposing a penalty of 25% as additional tariffs on India for buying Russian oil, we can tell you that it's now official. The Trump administration in the United States has officially issued a notice in this regard, and the punitive duties on Indian imports are set to kick in at 12:01 a.m. Washington time on the 27th of August. The notice issued by the Department of Homeland Security says the new levies are in response to threats to the United States by the government of the Russian Federation. And India is being targeted as part of that policy. This means India is now the most tariffed country in the world, apart from Brazil, with Trump doubling the tariff rate on Indian goods to a staggering 50%. The punishment, as we mentioned, is for buying Russian crude oil. On Monday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said India will withstand the economic pressure as it continues to strengthen its resilience. At a public rally, the Prime Minister said, no matter how much pressure comes, we will keep increasing our strength to withstand it. He added that his government will never let any harm come to small entrepreneurs, farmers, and livestock rearers. Relations between India and the United States have hit their lowest point in close to 3 decades, thanks to Trump's growing and brazen hostility as he singles India out for doing business with Russia, even calling the Indian economy dead. Trump has repeatedly lashed out at India and hurled multiple insults at it in recent weeks that have seen a steady deterioration of India-US ties. Key members of the Trump administration, from the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to White House Trade Advisor Peter Navarro, have leveled wild allegations against India, accusing it of profiteering from the war and bloodshed in Ukraine and funding the Russian war machine. But here lies the truth. The Trump administration is being downright hypocritical and dishonest in its dealings with India. They claim they are imposing punitive tariffs on India to force Russian President Putin to end the Ukraine war, and that by buying Russian oil, India is fattening Putin's war chest. But when asked why the US is not punishing China, the world's largest buyer of Russian oil, or the European Union, the world's largest buyer of Russian gas, they have no answers. All we've heard are bizarre and preposterous arguments that only reflect the duplicity of the US president. And that's not all. According to a statement made by Putin, no less, during his recent summit with Trump in Alaska, trade between Russia and the United States has grown by 20% since Trump was re-elected this January. And it gets worse for Donald Trump, because just today, news agency Reuters carried a report saying that when Russian and US officials met in Alaska, they didn't only discuss possible Ukraine peace deals, they also discussed possible energy deals between Russia and the United States of America. Can you believe it? By that logic, Trump should be imposing penalties on China, on the European Union, and also on his own country. Instead, Trump is not only treating China with kid gloves, he's actually going out of his way to woo Beijing. He has announced a pause on the tariffs on China as trade negotiations continue. He claims he has a great relationship with the country, which is seen by most as America's biggest adversary. And Trump now also wants to invite 600,000 Chinese students into the United States, a statement that has in fact seen a massive backlash from his anti-immigrant MAGA support base. On Monday, Trump said, "We're going to have a great relationship with China. I have incredible cards. If I play those cards, that would destroy China, but I'm not going to play those cards." He referred to his recent conversation with President Xi Jinping and said he was considering visiting Beijing soon. Additionally, Trump has opened the doors of American universities to 600,000 Chinese students. This at a time when his administration continues its crackdown on international students and immigrants in general. And MAGA activists are even demanding a pause on the issuance of H-1B visas that could hurt India or Indian professionals the most. This is a major U-turn from Trump's earlier stance. Previously, his administration had vowed to aggressively revoke visas for Chinese students, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or studying in critical fields. Unsurprisingly, Trump's remarks have invited strong criticism from his staunchest MAGA supporters, who've labeled his move as a betrayal of the America First agenda that catapulted him to the White House. Many say those Chinese students could be spies for China's ruling party. Interestingly, all this comes at a time when Chinese President Xi Jinping is gearing up to host more than 20 world leaders, including Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Vladimir Putin, at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or SCO summit at the end of this month. Experts believe the summit in Tianjin is likely to be a powerful show of global South solidarity amidst the Trump tariff tyranny. In fact, just last week, the Chinese ambassador to India had expressed solidarity with his host country, saying he condemned the US tariffs on India and that New Delhi must not give in to the pressure, as that would embolden the bully. Many geopolitical analysts have pointed out that at a time when country after country is surrendering to Trump's pressure tactics, India stands out as an island of courage. It's one country that refuses to kowtow to the bully and insists on asserting its strategic autonomy, whatever the price, while at the same time maintaining restraint, diplomatic dignity and grace in its response to Trump's repeated threats and provocations. That's how mature democracies behave. If only someone could tell Donald Trump that.
मैं आपको बार बार वादा करता हूं, मोदी के लिए आपके हित सर्वोपरि है। मेरी सरकार लघु उद्यमियों का, किसानों का, पशुपालकों का कभी भी अहित नहीं होने देंगी। दबाव कितना ही क्यों ना आए, हम झेलने की अपनी ताकत बढ़ाते जाएंगे।
We're going to have a great relationship with China. I mean, it's happening. You see it. It's happening. They have some cards. We have incredible cards, but I don't want to play those cards. If I played those cards, that would destroy China. I'm not going to play those cards.
Mr. President, on
the United States has imposed tariffs of up to 50% on India, and even threatened for more. China fully opposes it. In the face of such acts, silence or compromise only emboldens the bully. China will firmly stand with India to uphold the multilateral trading system with the World Trade Organization at its core.
All right. Let's now go straight across to our panel of experts to decode these big developments that have been taking place and, of course, some of the big ones that are coming up over the next few days. Joining me on Global Pulse tonight is Raymond Vickery. He is former United States Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Trade Development. Thanks very much, Mr. Vickery, for joining me once again on Global Pulse. We also have with us Gulshan Sachdeva. He's a professor at the School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University here in Delhi, and he is the chief coordinator for Dakshin, a think tank. Thanks very much, Professor Sachdeva, for being with us. And completing the panel tonight is Dr. Junhua Zhang. He is a senior associate at the European Institute for Asian Studies in Berlin. He has earlier taught at the Shanghai Jiaotong University and Xinjiang University in China. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for joining me on Global Pulse. Let me start with our American guest, Raymond Vickery. You know, I have been saying on this show for several days now, hypocrisy, thy name is Donald Trump. And today we have further proof to validate that statement. There is a news report that's been published by news agency Reuters that says US and Russian government officials discussed several energy deals on the sidelines of negotiations this month that sought to achieve peace in Ukraine. These deals were put forward as incentives to encourage the Kremlin to agree to peace in Ukraine and for Washington to ease sanctions on Russia. And this report, Mr. Vickery, comes on a day when the United States of America formally notified the punitive 25% tariffs on India that have been imposed for the country, on the country for doing business with a long-standing ally, Russia. Your take, the sheer hypocrisy of it. I have no words for it anymore. It's absolutely astounding.
Well, thanks very much for having me. I think that we have to step back and understand that the relationship between two great democracies like US and India is of paramount importance in addressing any of the myriad problems which face the international community. That having been said, there must be adherence to values, rule of law, some sort of system. Unfortunately, President Donald Trump has thrown all of that overboard. What he views as his own interest is paramount. He takes the view of a real estate developer, which is his background. He takes the view of someone who is a TV personality and wants to create a lot of buzz, as opposed to institutional and values approach. Now is the time, of course, for India to step forward as a leading democracy and make common cause with other great democracies around the world, whether they be in Europe, Japan, or Australia or elsewhere. That doesn't mean you don't have relations, of course, with China and Russia, and try to bring us back to a multilateral approach, which Trump has thrown out the window. I would point out to your listeners the measures that Trump is taking are under scrutiny by the courts here in the United States. Initial indications are that he doesn't even have the authority under our law and Constitution. And one must never confuse Donald Trump with the United States. The United States has been around for 250 years, has a constitution, a system of checks and balances. Unfortunately, those don't always take place immediately. But we have worked our way through difficult problems in regard to nuclear testing. I lived through the 60s and the whole Vietnam situation, and we've come out stronger on the other end. But it requires cool heads on both sides to be able to get us back to a rules-based and values-based system rather than just flying off the handle on whatever the latest statement from our very unfortunate president is.
You know, I completely take and respect the point you're making, Mr. Vickery, about how there is more to the India-US relationship than Donald Trump. I mean, we've seen how the first 6 months of the second Trump presidency have been a complete disaster for this relationship. Many would say perhaps for the world at large as well. There are many now who are so bearish on this relationship now that they believe that we have no choice but to ride out the remaining 3.5 years of this presidency before any semblance of normalcy can return to this relationship that Donald Trump seems hell-bent on wrecking. However, at the moment, whether we like it or not, it is Donald Trump and his hypocrisy and duplicity that we will have to continue to deal with. Let me bring in Professor Gulshan Sachdeva at this point. Professor Sachdeva, you know, I don't even know where to begin to talk about the duplicity of the Trump administration. Every time they're asked why they haven't imposed punitive tariffs on China, which is the largest buyer of Russian oil in the world, or why they haven't tariffed the European Union, which is the largest buyer of Russian gas in the world, we get the most bizarre and preposterous arguments from them. And today comes this Reuters report suggesting that while we thought that Putin and Trump were busy discussing a Ukraine peace deal in Alaska on the sidelines, officials from the two sides were actually also discussing potential energy deals between the two countries. And all of this coming on a day when, as I said, a formal notification announcing the punitive 25% tariffs on India has been announced.
Well, you know, there are many issues now here. You are right. You can look at all the statements and we can shout that there are hypocritic and there are all kind of issues, which are true. But, you know, the problem is India's relationship with the United States are very, very important relationship. And we also must acknowledge, I think there has been certain error of judgment or misjudgment from the Indian policymakers to evaluate how President Trump is going to conduct and what kind of policies he is going to follow with India, with China, and with any other country in the world. And I think many countries were preparing for this. I think we also did, but somehow we took many of the things for granted. And that's why, in fact, there is certain shock at some point when, you know, many things are announced. So first thing, I think the effort has to be from our side, despite all kind of statements and all kind of, you know, things which are coming from the United States, you know, we have to stabilize this relationship. Today, it might be 60% what he has announced. And, you know, there is, you may not find logic in many of those things. And ultimately, you can see many of other countries, you know, they have negotiated a trade deal. Somewhere they have found between 15 to 20%, large number of countries with Asia and other places, and also Europeans. And I think we also should have done a similar kind of work. And perhaps maybe in the coming weeks and coming months, we may come back to that particular point where we'll have certain deals. And, you know, many other things will also keep on happening between the United States and Russia, and on Ukraine issue, and many other issues will keep happening. But of course, I mean, there is also a serious issue. Now, large number of our exports are threatened now from tomorrow itself. So obviously, whether you look at textile, whether you look at diamond industry, whether you look at, you know, our, many other, other exports in the United States, you know, they are having serious difficulties now. There is an existential threat for all of them. So India has to really work on many fronts. First, you have to stabilize our relations. Second, we also, I mean, obviously you can't take things for granted, which we did actually in the last couple of years. You have to look at many new markets. And it's not just only about, you know, the trade agreements, which we have done with a few of them, including with the UK recently. but also very close now, perhaps with the European Union, which I mean the deadline is somewhere by the end of this year. Whether we'll be able to do it or not, that's a different matter. But we also have to look at very seriously something else. I mean, it's you also have to look at response also has to be strategically. I mean, we walked out earlier from the RCEP. There is a time you have to reconsider many of those things. And of course, the Prime Minister is also going to visit China for the SCO summit. In fact, last year he didn't go. And when India had presidency of SCO in 23, this was totally overshadowed by India's G20 presidency. And even the summit meeting was just reduced to 2 hours online affair. So it means, things are changing in a different direction. And of course, our relationship with Russia is quite, I mean, everybody knows about this. And I don't think India is going to change our relationship or stop buying from Russia so long as this is economical for the companies, not because President Trump has imposed certain tariffs. I mean, yes, at the moment there is certain existential problem for those exporters, which we will have to do it. And we have to keep working, finding some kind of settlement, some kind of trade agreement at some point. And also creating, as Prime Minister has said, more investment within the domestic economy, preparing our consumers, preparing our industries to, see, I mean, all kind of threats which are there, and there are serious issues. So, at many fronts, actually, India has to work, but we have to also stabilize this relationship, which is very crucial.
We need to stabilize the relationship. The question is, how is that going to happen given Donald Trump's hostility and intransigence? Let me bring in Dr. Junhua Zhang at this point. Dr. Zhang, I hope I've got your name right. Please feel free to correct me. The question I want to ask you is, of course, there's a lot of anger in India about these Trump tariffs. 50%, the highest on any country in the world. Trump has clearly singled India out for buying Russian oil. He seems to be dealing with China with kid gloves at the moment. We know that, there's a pause on tariffs on China for a 90-day period as trade negotiations are ongoing. Trump is also saying, I have cards that can destroy China, but I'm not going to play those cards. We're going to have a great relationship with China. And he's also at the same time talking about inviting 600,000 Chinese students into the United States. But fact of the matter is, there is deep distrust at the moment between, I think, Donald Trump and the rest of the world. And perhaps it would be correct to say that China is no exception to that. Just last week, we heard the Chinese ambassador to India saying China strongly condemns the punitive tariffs on India, and India must not succumb to the pressure from the United States because that would embolden the bully. My question is, is Trump a man who anyone, including China, can trust at the moment, even if he seems to be extending an olive branch to China at the moment? Dr. Zhang, can you hear me? Okay, I'm not sure if we have Dr. Zhang with us at the moment. We will try and reconnect with him in just a few moments. Let me now go back to Raymond Vickery at this point. Raymond Vickery, let's focus for a moment on the renewed, shall I say, camaraderie that you've seen between New Delhi and Beijing in recent days. Some are calling it a thaw in India-China ties. Many are looking at it as sheer geopolitical pragmatism because of all the pressure that Trump is putting on everyone at the moment with his tariffs. Like I mentioned, the Chinese ambassador to India last week expressed solidarity with India, condemning the Trump tariffs. And in just a few days, Prime Minister Modi is going to travel to China to attend the SCO summit, where he is expected to hold talks with President Xi Jinping on the sidelines, and President Putin is likely to attend as well. Do you believe that there is a growing geopolitical realignment taking place thanks to Donald Trump and his bullying?
Well, there's no question that Donald Trump has disrupted a growing relationship that we've been working on, I personally, for 30 years to try to bridge gaps in policy. And trust is absolutely foremost in that. And we had the US-India civil nuclear deal not really focus so much on nuclear matters, but on trust. And what he's done is wreck that trust to some extent. But I would go back to the proposition that at this time, India must not just see this in reactionary terms and become hysterical about the evident hypocrisy, but look to its own values and its own interest and what it must do. There's no question that economic reforms have lagged in India. There is really no question that India has not had a completely rational tariff approach. India should look to its own interest in regard to China. China claims an entire Indian state. It's not going to just reverse its position based upon the fact that Donald Trump is a hypocrite. In regard to Ukraine, India has an interest in peace and prosperity throughout the world. It can't just say, as some have said, well, Europe's problems are Europe's problems, and we'll do whatever we want to. India can step forward and fill a leadership vacuum, which is very much needed at this time. But it will not do it by simply being reactive to Donald Trump's latest statements. Donald Trump has a completely transactional view. He is going to do whatever he thinks will get him the Nobel Peace Prize and make him the great man. That is a very, very unfortunate development, and I think we'll correct it. The midterm elections, the courts, I think our system will hold. But it requires support from outside, from other great democracies like India. And now is the time for India to step forward to make whatever arrangements it needs to with countries which it really doesn't have much in common, China particularly, Russia, but then to reach out to Europe, to Brazil, to Japan, to Australia, to the rest of the world. And with that sort of coalition and with a strategy, we can bring order out of the chaos which President Trump seems to thrive on.
Well, he certainly seems to thrive on chaos. He's not just a disruptor. I think many have now begun to call him an agent of chaos and even a destroyer. Let me now see if Dr. Zhang can hear me. Dr. Zhang, welcome to Global Pulse. We had a bit of difficulty with your line earlier. Can you hear me now, sir? Dr. Zhang, can you hear me? Okay, we certainly seem to have a problem with his line, which we will need to fix. So let me now go across to Professor Gulshan Sachdeva. Professor Sachdeva, Raymond Vickery makes the point that India should not be acting hysterical at this point. Yes, we all know about Donald Trump's hypocrisy, but this is the time for India to, in a sense, step into the leadership vacuum that exists globally. But fact of the matter is that many would argue that India has actually had a very, very mature response to all of Donald Trump's provocations and repeated threats. India has acted with restraint, with diplomatic dignity, with absolute grace. It's not indulged in any name-calling of the kind that we've seen from Donald Trump and his administration. They've called India a dead economy, amongst other things. All you've heard India say is that we will continue to assert our strategic autonomy, we're not going to give in to any external pressure, and we're going to protect our national interests, whatever the price. And you heard none other than Prime Minister Narendra Modi say that as recently as yesterday. There are many who are saying that at a time when country after country seems to be surrendering to the pressure and bullying tactics of Donald Trump and kissing the ring, India stands out as an island of courage, a country which is not indulging in any name calling, like I said, but at the same time, which is saying that we're not going to kowtow to a man who sees himself as the emperor of the world, that we will continue to maintain our strategic autonomy, whether Donald Trump likes it or not. How would you look at that?
Well, you're right, absolutely right, Neha. In fact, despite all kind of statements coming almost every day, and even some of the actions, particularly on the tariffs, etc., the Indian response has been very, very restrained and very mature. In fact, Prime Minister has never said anything against the United States. Only thing the response India has been, but what we also must not underestimate the impact all these kind of things which are coming from the United States, even if our main leaders might not have said anything or would have really responded in a very mature manner. But the way you can see the social media, the way many analysts are writing, so the geopolitical currents are already shifting somewhere else. And that will have a serious consequences in the long run for the Indo-US relationship. And anyway, there is a decline of the West, by and large, and there is the rise of the rest. And India, anyway, you can look at, whether you look at the way India is articulating the voice of the global South.
Yes.
So now the thing was that, earlier we were thinking that, the China is kind of, our competitor there, and China already have, they also try to claim to, the voice of the global South or the leaders of the global South. But, things may change in a very, very different way without even people realizing what is really happening. And that's what, in fact, all the institutions of the global governance, they are not working. You look at the UNSC, you look at WTO, you look at WHO, and America, to some extent, is quite responsible for that, what really is things are happening. And slowly, the countries of the global South, which are, they are not really a bunch of developing countries. We are heavyweights economically, politically, strategically, and even intellectually. So they are the ones who are coming together. They may not have institutions at the moment. You look at the BRICS. And in fact, as I was mentioning, the Prime Minister going to SCO, maybe this time he'll be speaking something very different kind of language than what we have seen in the earlier SCO or other meetings. So things are happening, even if India is responding in a very mature manner, but the kind of damage which has been done, it will have, we'll have to see the consequences of that in the years to come. So that's what I was saying. So for India, we have to stabilize this relationship, but at the same time, things have already started moving into very, very different directions, which we are going to see in the years to come now.
Well, certainly, it could take years for the relationship to recover from the damage that has been, inflicted by Donald Trump. I mean, this is a relationship that has been built painstakingly with a consensus in both countries over the last 3 years and 3 decades, I beg your pardon. And this is, many believe, the lowest point that we've seen in the India-US relationship, perhaps since the post-Pokhran sanctions of 1998. Before I take this back to Raymond Vickery, Professor Sachdev, I want you to respond to what Raymond Vickery was saying earlier. While, I certainly believe that this is India displaying pragmatism at a time when we're under pressure from Donald Trump, there is a realignment of geopolitical interests that seems to be happening, with many now observing that India might actually be moving a lot closer to Russia and China. But Raymond Vickery says, India cannot trust China. After all, you have a fraught history with that country. It's not just the border dispute, but also the fact that, and this is something that's been pointed out by many here in India, that as recently as May, during Operation Sindoor, the 100-day military conflict between India and Pakistan, Pakistan had very active military and intelligence support from Beijing. That trust deficit still remains.
Well, true. I mean, it's not question of who trusting whom. Can you trust United States? Can you trust China? Can you trust any other country? Its question is at one particular point in history where there are certain interests converge. I mean, obviously, within all these relationships, in fact, I think that if one can look historically, the trust factor which is there between India and Russia, you don't find that kind of trust anywhere else, and perhaps to some extent between the India and France, that kind of strategic partnership we have. I mean, today you have more than 40 strategic partnership India has. So it's not there at the same level, but obviously certain interests are converging somewhere. So now it's very, very pragmatic. Only you can see, I mean, these are two large economies next to each other, growing very fast. So for decades, actually, they can feed each other. And, the kind of even technologies which India needs for its modernization, it's not that, and even the latest technologies which are going to come in the years to come, whether you look at artificial intelligence, whether you look at green technology, whether you look at many other things, China does have certain of those technologies, they have mastered it. And, they can also play a certain kind of, role in the India's modernization. We have a very important trading relationship, but of course, a huge deficit. That's a major factor, which is major concern. And also the market access within China, which almost every country has similar kind of problem with China. But, there are issues in which India can also work with China. This is what actually perhaps they would be trying to do. And why we did not go into RCEP, because one of the factors was basically China. If many things move, many other, and in the last 4 years, or last, many years actually, the India's foreign policy discourse was totally dominated by the Indo-Pacific narrative. But, we also realized that the kind of, yes, Indo-Pacific is very much important for India. And in the context of rising China, I think the relationship with the United States and the partnership, the global partnership with the United States and with Europe and others and with Japan has been very, very useful. But India also has very serious continental interests as well. And within the continental sphere, you have to work with Russia, you have to work with China, you also have to work with Iran, you have to work with many, many other players, because you can't just ignore those, interests, whether strategic interest or even economic interest in those areas. So India has to work in a very, very different manners and yes, for the last few years, now we are talking about low point in the Indo-US. Last few years also have been low point in the India-China relationship. And I think that what you can see from so many statements coming, both from India and China, that there is a certain urge from both sides to make it slightly normal. And normal means, yes, not that the border issue is going to be resolved tomorrow. It may take longer. The issue has been with us for quite some time. But there was also periods, both with the United States and with China, there has been periods when there have been certain difficulties. And the difficulty is not the first time we are facing certain difficulties with the United States. Historically, there were many points when things happened, things were low, but then things come back. The same is also with China. I mean, it happened. And then many years we have seen after Rajiv Gandhi's, visit to China, peace and tranquility at the border. And then that was also the period when, our trade actually blossomed and, during those years. Now the trading links are there with China, but still there are no investment linkages, there are no technology linkages. And there are possibilities that actually India may also try to build those linkages there, not that at the cost of something else. But now, since things are moving in different direction, that's what I was saying. The already geopolitical things are shifting. And then we also have to stabilize this relationship, but also working on very, very different fronts.
Yes, we need to work on multiple fronts. And I think it is clear that, despite the difficult past that India and China share, there is a growing convergence of interests, given that we are living in the Trump era. And I think both India and China have said publicly that they have decided to, in some ways, de-link the border dispute from trade and economic ties. Okay, I'm going to try my luck one more time with Dr. Zhang. Let's hope third time's the charm. Dr. Zhang, can you hear me this time around?
Yes, I think this time you can hear me too. Yeah.
I
Anyhow,
can finally hear you, sir. Great to have you on the show. I have so many questions to ask you. So let me begin with this. First and foremost, what is your take on Donald Trump's hypocrisy that we've all been talking about? He's penalizing India for doing business with Russia, despite the fact that the United States' own trade with Russia has grown by 20% according to President Putin. He said this at the Alaska summit recently. There's today a report by Reuters that says while they were discussing a Ukraine peace deal in Alaska, Trump and Putin were also discussing potential energy deals between America and Russia. What do you make of this hypocrisy that Donald Trump is displaying at the moment while bullying the rest of the world? Of course, last week, China's ambassador to India expressed solidarity with India, saying we condemn these tariffs and India must not give in to the bully.
Okay, first of all, I think that there is kind of a misunderstanding on the Indian side, in the sense that I would not use the word hypocrisy to describe President Trump. I think Trump is a guy, unfortunately, without any kind of strategic thinking, and it's not the issue of hypocrisy. It's an issue of, let's say, vanity. What Trump has been doing in his position, I think, is try to satisfy his vanity. So, I mean, he has a great ambition to get the Peace Nobel Prize and so on. This is exactly that kind of vanity, But let's come back to China and Russia. So in terms of China, my first question is to India is that, do you know what kind of leverage does India have? I would say India, unfortunately, doesn't have many leverages in comparison to China. And that is the issue. And, the tariff war, actually the scale of the tariff war goes beyond the tariff itself. It's the whole, China has already experienced the first tariff war, and China, Xi Jinping is very experienced in handling that. So that is the issue. And this time, I think China has demonstrated a very effective weapon, that is the rare earth. So China is in control of, say, 98% of rare earth. And the American industry and the American defense industry, they are very dependent on China's rare earth. Of course, I mean, the U.S. Is trying to resume its rare earth production, but it will take a long time. It will take at least a 5-year time. So in that, what I wanted to say is that, and this is a very effective leverage. And so when Trump, say, promised China to, say, get several thousand students, it was not his, actually, it was not his intention. It didn't, match the thinking of the Republicans. But Trump was forced to do so because during the first negotiation talk and the second negotiation talk, China demanded that, say, first they should get the reasonable tariff, and the second, the Americans should accept the Chinese students. And this is a very clever move in the sense that, how can China become so strong and become the number one in the economy? That is exactly the, I think, to try to make use of the advanced nations such as the US, and China sent so many students. Well, before, let's say, before Trump, say the China sent so many students, and they many of them, they stayed in the US, but also quite a lot of them, they moved back, and they contributed greatly to the Chinese, This is the issue. The second,
Dr. Zhang, you make some very valid points. I take your point that China certainly has much more leverage with Donald Trump that India does. I think that is a reality that is well recognized and appreciated here in New Delhi. Though it's interesting, you talk about rare earth magnets just today. Even as he is wooing China on the one hand, Donald Trump issued a threat to Beijing as well, saying that if you do not give us access to your rare earth magnets, we are going to impose 200% tariffs on you. And at the same time, I must say you're being rather charitable towards Donald Trump by saying it's all vanity and just an absence of strategic thinking. I still maintain Donald Trump is a hypocrite and an absolute bully. But let me ask you a follow-up question. Like I said, last week, the Chinese ambassador to India condemned Trump tariffs on India, saying that this is a bully at work and India must not give in to that pressure. We also know that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be in China next week to attend the SCO summit. He's expected to hold talks with President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the summit, and President Putin will also be in attendance. A lot of significance is being attached to this particular SCO summit, given its timing, because it comes at a time when Trump is obviously pressurizing the entire world with his tariffs. Do you believe that unintentionally and ironically, Donald Trump is pushing India, China and Russia closer to each other? How significant do you believe that the upcoming SCO summit is going to be? And what would you say to those who are saying that, even RIC is an idea whose time has come?
Definitely, I think Trump is pushing pushing India and China and Russia together more closer, especially between especially he's putting China and India approach each other. So what I wanted to say is that the issue is that
okay, we may have lost it.
Pardon?
Go ahead, sir. I think we lost you for a moment there. Please complete your point.
Okay, what I wanted to say is that in my view, Indian hasn't been, handled smartly in the sense as China. And what China is now doing is taking a soft approach toward India, because India's market, its market, it's very important for China, and China has huge difficulties in exporting its goods to wealthy countries, including the U.S., through the tariff war and through its, its support of Putin in Ukrainian war in Europe. So in Europe, China got difficulties, and in the U.S., due to the tariff war, China also have many obstacles. But China's economy is very much dependent on exports. So what I wanted to say is that India is a great market for China, and that is one of the reasons why China is approaching India. And then the question to India is that how to make good use of this kind of situation. Let's say something from China, they are really some technologies from China, they are really good. Okay, so they take them, but this kind of massive exports without any consideration of the local industry, this is not good for any country. So in this sense, I think India has to do it in a very smart way. Let's say make good use of it, but at the same time, let China know that the border issue and also the issue of the reservoir close to India, all these issues, they still remain unsolved. So we have to solve these issues as well. And also the relationship between say China and Pakistan. By the way, this is a very tricky issue. Now,
Yes.
I think there is a slight change between China and Pakistan, and this will be also a good chance for India as well. So let's see. I think
let's certainly hope so, because there was a lot of concern in India about the Chinese support that was extended to Pakistan in the month of May, when India and Pakistan had a 100-day military conflict. But final question, Dr. Zhang, before I let you go, going by what you're saying, I gather the argument you're making is that it is time for India and China to strengthen their trade and economic ties. China is largely reliant on its exports. India has a big market. But my question is, the thaw that we are seeing now in this otherwise fraught relationship between India and China, do you believe this thaw is likely to last, and that India and China can truly strengthen their relationship in the face of all the pressures that exist thanks to Donald Trump?
Well, I think again, this is the unique opportunity for both countries to build a kind of tie, but this tie should be in favor of India as well, and in the sense that India really needs technologies, needs many new stuff, and China has absorbed quite a lot of Western technologies very well, and China itself is also technologically quite innovative. So in this sense, make good use of it, but don't become, let's say, a country where China's goods are dumped in your, in India and so on. So this is the issue which should be avoided. But China, when China exports goods, it never cares about that. So this is the issue, and I think it should be handled very diplomatically.
You're quite right. India cannot allow, its markets to become a dumping ground for Chinese goods. And at the same time, like you said, the border issue still remains unresolved. And that, of course, continues to be a thorn in New Delhi's side. And it's something that has come up during every discussion between the two sides. As I wrap up this discussion, I will go across to my other two guests, Raymond Vickery. Wrap this discussion up for us. How do you see these punitive tariffs on India panning out? Do you still believe that India and the United States can have a trade deal, one that's obviously stuck because India, reports suggest, is refusing to yield to Donald Trump's demands, especially with regard to opening up its dairy and agricultural sectors? These are very sensitive issues for India, for its farmers, and Prime Minister Modi, in fact, has said as recently as yesterday that we are not going to compromise on our national interests, come what may. How do you see this panning out?
Well, I see it panning out in the long run in favor of the relationship between these two greatest democracies and a absolutely fundamental relationship in terms of economic growth. But getting from here to there is the problem. And what we need to do in times of crisis is to step back and look at fundamental values. And the fundamental values of India are much the same as in the United States and with democracies. They are for freedom of speech, freedom of press, value of the individual. These are not things which India has in common with China and with Russia. Sure, we're going to have to work our way through the oil Ukraine problem and through what happens with China and whether they're willing to adhere to international rules of law. But we must not throw the baby out with the bathwater in regard to U.S.-China. I firmly believe that Donald Trump is an aberration. I do believe that our own institutions are going to hold, and we require help from other democratic nations like India at this point work our way through a very, very difficult situation.
All right, I'll give you the last word, Professor Sachdeva. These tariffs are kicking in now. What do you think it means for the India-US relationship, apart from the impact that it may have on the Indian economy? Also, how significant do you believe the upcoming SCO summit is? What should we be watching out for?
Well, I think, what we are seeing here is that agreement or not, but issues would be still. Many other things which are going to happen, particularly between India and China, and India, China, Russia, and as I said, in the continental sphere with others. We might see, as I think I do agree with my Chinese friend, that what he's saying is China does have certain technologies. And anyway, as far as China is concerned, India would always be very careful, whether opening for technology or for opening for investment. But I think what we can see as a result of this churning, which has just happened now, as a result of President Trump's policies, that certain new momentum, certain new beginning I can see here between India and China, and that might be useful for both the economies in the long run. And that also perhaps in the, if you look at India's manufacturing, if you look at India's exports, still a large part of this comes from China. So if you also bring more technologies and other things, of course, very carefully, that of course, I'm sure India will do that. There'll be much more linkages with the Chinese economy as well. And in the point what he raised about India doesn't have leverage against the United States. And I think the major leverage still is the Indian market. Growing market, large middle class, and there what in fact I can see there is a certain difficulty in finding this trade deal, because what American businesses are also looking in many other areas. India actually is quite, even before this trade negotiations began, India was quite, hopeful, and in fact, they did open some of those areas, and India perhaps may open some other areas. But of course, there are also red lines, specific areas, whether in agriculture or in some of those areas, which it will be very difficult. I think they should not really break, really the trade relationship between India and the United States. And I'm sure, I think both will find a way. It may take some time, but the damage has already been done. Things have moved somewhere else.
All right. So can we still have an India-US trade deal? There seem to be too many sticking points and red lines that India is not willing to compromise on. It's also interesting you say that even though India needs to tread cautiously, there seems to be a new momentum in the India-China relationship. And it's very interesting, Mr. Raymond Vickery says that India and the United States have shared values, unlike India and China. But somebody needs to tell Donald Trump that. Okay, on that note, Raymond Vickery, Dr. Junjua Zhang and Professor Gulshan Sachdeva, thank you so much to all three of you for joining me on Global Pulse tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Well, as we said, the additional 25% tariffs on India are now going to kick in. That means India is now being tariffed at a whopping 50% by the United States of America. What does this mean for the India-US relationship, and what can we expect from the upcoming SCO summit in China? These are, of course, stories that we'll continue to track very closely here on Global Pulse. Stay tuned, and thanks very much for watching.